forward to Councillor. Emily Norton is in her third term on the City Council, where she serves on the Finance Committee, the Public Facilities Committee and the OPEB Board of Trustees. Emily grew up in Newton and came back to raise her family here. For her day job, she serves as Executive Director of the Charles River Watershed Association, and prior to that, she was a Massachusetts Director for the Sierra Club. She is a BA from the University of Vermont and a Master's in Public Policy from Harvard Kennedy School. Bryan Barash lives in Newtonville with his wife Claudia and their dogs. They're not named here in the bio. Bryan's a BC Law graduate and two-term Newton Human Rights Commissioner. He's been active in the local community for years. Bryan is General Counsel to State Senate President Emerita Harriette Chandler and has extensive policy and government experience. So welcome to you both.
Thank you.
What is the most important legislation you have proposed during your time as a City Councillor, and why?
So there's quite a few that are very close to my heart, but to choose one, I think I will go with Newton Power Choice, which is the green electricity program. As you heard in my biography, I work as an environmental advocate by day, and so the benefit to Newton and Ward 2 of that is I'm able to bring my expertise. So Newton Power Choice is a form of, it's called municipal aggregation. Massachusetts is one of only 6 states that allows municipal aggregation, where a city can contract for electricity on behalf of the residents and small businesses. And the beauty of it is that in addition to cost savings from basically bulk purchasing, you can also have more, you can require more green, clean energy. And so this was a campaign of the Sierra Club when I was the Massachusetts director. So I was able to take that expertise and bring it to Newton, as none of the other city councilors or the mayor at the time had heard of it. So I organized a lot of community meetings. I organized for several city councilors to come meet with a consultant about municipal aggregation at the Mass Municipal Association conference, and I did a lot of work in order to educate folks and get people excited about it. And then local residents and Green Newton and activists really took off and organized, and as a result, Newton literally has the most clean energy in our electricity contract of any city or town in Massachusetts. So I'm very proud of that.
Thank you, Emily. And Bryan, what's your top legislative priority and why?
So first I want to say that Newton Power Choice is a great program, and I'm really happy that we're doing it. I'd say my top legislative priority is to increase transparency in our local government. It's something I've done a lot of talking about as I'm campaigning. I think that people deserve an opportunity to have direct access to their local government. And some of the key things I've been talking about are making sure that it's easy and convenient for folks to track ordinances online. It can be really difficult to know who proposed what, who voted on what, and I think the city needs to have a much better system for voters to follow what their incumbents are voting on.
Okay, thanks. I want to then quickly move on to more specific questions, and this one has to do with planning and development. I suspect that many of us are here, or many of the public are here, and people watching this will be interested in what we refer to as residential density. So at approximately 5,000 people per square mile, Newton's population density is currently about 2/3 that of Boston. Do you support residential development that further increases Newton's population density? And if so, how much and why? Or, to put it another way, Newton's population is about 90,000. So what do you think would be an ideal population for Newton, and why? So let's start with you, Bryan.
Sure. So I do think that Newton should be growing, and that we should be thoughtfully adding population throughout our village centers. I think that transit-oriented housing is a key way for us to prepare for climate change. I think that it is a crucial way to add affordable housing, and to add housing at all different levels. We need apartments, we need condos, we need options that are going to fit the variety of people who would like to be able to live in Newton, who are being pushed out or who would like to move here and aren't able to. I think it's something really critical that we need to be making progress on, and we need to do it throughout the city, not just in one part of the city, but thoughtfully throughout near transportation hubs.
So do you have any thoughts, just to follow up before we get to Emily, on what would a dense Newton look like if we increase the density?
Well, I think it's something that we do deliberately, and we do sort of in stages. And we have 2 new buildings that are happening in Newtonville right now. We have 2 projects that are under consideration at Riverside and at Northland. And I think we do have to take it on a project-by-project basis. But I think that it is good to add housing, again, thoughtfully, incrementally, as we go forward.
Okay, Emily, do you want me to read the question again, or are you ready? Happy to go?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
So this is definitely probably the biggest issue that people are concerned about, besides maybe the quality of the roads and the traffic, but they are related. So I do think that we can have more housing in Newton and Newtonville, and actually Newtonville, Ward 2, we have done our part more than other wards to date. So of the over 600 new housing units between 2014 and 2018, 36% of them were in Ward 2. We're 1/8 of the city, but well over 1/3 of the new housing units are in Ward 2. So I am very interested in development that is consistent with what Ward 2 and Newtonville area residents have said in survey after survey that they're interested in. People are not anti-development. People are not anti-affordable housing. I love to remind people that at the time that the condo development, the 40B condo development was proposed for Court Street, the residents there said to me, can we have engine 6 instead? They wanted more of an all-affordable option rather than the very large, dense, luxury condo unit development that went in with some affordable housing, but mostly expensive. So I'm interested in being consistent with what those surveys have shown. I agree with that people want 3 to 4 stories. They want small, interesting retail. They want beautification. They want walkability. I think we can have those things. I'm not in favor of sort of outsized projects that don't make us feel like a city of villages anymore. And particularly when you have so much development in our ward with more proposed, when we don't even see the impacts of the development that's already being built, to me, that's why it's so important to have a local ward counselor. They are looking out just for the ward. And that is something that I differed with my opponent on. He served on the Charter Commission trying to eliminate this seat that we are now both running for. I would never have done that. I will never do that. I will always support every ward long after I'm gone. This isn't about my seat. This is about the city that I grew up in and that I love. It's really important for each area to have someone really looking out for them, particularly at a time like this when it's the traffic, the congestion, the scale that is being proposed. It's big changes being proposed for Newton.
Okay, out of fairness, I guess I should give you a chance to come back at that, Bryan, given that you've been mentioned in dispatches.
I appreciate that. And I did support a smaller city council. I supported one way to do that. I thought it was a good idea to have a smaller city council. It's something I heard over and over again from voters that they were interested in. And the voters decided that they wanted to keep the current system. So my next question was, how do I make sure that the current system is working as well as it can? And my answer was, I think I've got some good ideas for what we should be doing in this city. I'm going to go out there and run for a seat where I can talk to the voters in the ward and ask them what they're looking for. And what I found is, that there was a lot of interest in the ideas that I had. I've knocked on over 6,000 doors within our ward. I've talked to so many people. I am so grateful for all the support that I have within the community, for the over 25 house parties that we've organized, talking to people at their doors and in their living rooms. No one is more in touch with the pulse of what people are thinking and what's going on in our ward than I am after all those conversations. And I think I'm ready to lead and to bring their voices to City Hall.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question in this category, and that is this one. Many Newton residents are concerned that dense development is being concentrated in a few less wealthy neighbourhoods of Newton, while wealthier areas are left largely untouched. And what do you think is the best way to distribute development around Newton? Let's start with Emily.
Well, I already touched on that in my previous answer. I absolutely agree with the gist of the question. We've seen that most of the development is being concentrated. It's not going to Chestnut Hill and Waban. It's going to areas that I understand are more affordable for developers to develop, but these have serious impacts on the traffic, on the congestion, and our schools. Now, I have 3 children. who have gone through or are in the schools now, and so I can speak to this. Our schools are packed. I'm in the house that I grew up in on Prescott Street, which is north of the Mass Pike. I went to the Horace Mann School. My children went to the Horace Mann School. Now children on Prescott Street are redistricted to Cabot. All the children who are just over the line of the Mass Pike are being redistricted to schools south of the Pike. So it's a quality of life issue when you can't walk to the school anymore, you don't really have a neighborhood school anymore. So these are things that really affect people's quality of life.
Okay, Brian?
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah. Many Newton residents are concerned that dense development is being concentrated in a few less wealthy neighbourhoods of the city, while wealthier areas are left largely untouched. What do you think is the best way to distribute development around Newton?
Absolutely, and I think the key is that development does need to be distributed throughout Newton. We have some great transportation hubs in Newtonville and places like West Newton, it's true, but there are also some great Green Line transportation hubs throughout the city, and I really think that presents an opportunity for transit-oriented development in other parts of the city. I think we're going through a vision planning process right now for Washington Street because it's been an area that has been targeted for development. And there are people who are bringing proposals forward. And I think it was the right call to get in front of that and say, we need a plan where the city is leading on this conversation rather than developers leading. And I think that's exactly what we should do for other parts of the city where there are these opportunities and we need to take advantage of them and we can't just be building in one part of the city.
Marcus, could I respond
Yes,
to that?
yes, Emily.
So I think that is a great point, and there are areas that have transit, but we can't assume that just because you live next to transit, you're not going to drive. My opponent lives next to transit, and he drives every day into Boston. When I worked in Boston, I took the train. Everyone makes choices for a reason, but I think that's why, whether it's the Northland project or Riverside project, when we're proposing development around the city, my concern about the mammoth things that are being proposed is people are going to drive. And even the folks who are the most environmental advocates in our city, who've put together this incredible climate plan, predict that by 2050, we would have reduced vehicle miles traveled, VMT, by 20%. It's not going to go, even those who are most ambitious and optimistic don't think that we're not going to be driving anymore. So that to me is another reason. I'm environmental, this is literally my day job, but I'm also a realist, and I know that more traffic and more congestion is a quality of life issue. It means you're not home making dinner for your kids. In theory, I understand some people make dinner for their children. My children would argue that I'm not one of those, but in theory I could be, or we all can be if we're spending less time in traffic.
Okay, certainly traffic will come up again, as will the question of who, as Brian suggested, who or what entities we want to be making decisions about development. Oh, you want to come back?
Yeah, if I could. I want to address this issue of who drives, because I think that what our city should be encouraging is the opportunity for those who want to try to go car light, whatever that means for them. We should make that easier for them. That means, yes, there should be apartments in the village centers where it's convenient to walk or to bike to amenities, to take the train. And for people like me, who I do drive my car, I also use my bike, I also take public transportation. I don't understand this talking point that I drive every day. I use a variety of ways to get around, as many of us do, and I think as you do as well.
Okay, let's move on to budget and finance, unless we get too far down the rabbit hole of cycling, or not.
Hard to go down a rabbit hole with a bike.
It is hard to go down a rabbit hole with a bike, but let's move on because we don't want to get sidetracked into a comedy show. So budget and finance. In 2007, Newton's Blue Ribbon Commission on the Municipal Budget recommended that Newton strengthen its commercial tax base, noting that commercial growth had been eclipsed by residential development. But since those findings were published, Newton's commercial tax base has further declined. Do you agree with the Blue Ribbon Commission Newton needs a stronger commercial tax base? And if so, what policies would you support to achieve that goal? Let's start with you, Brian.
Absolutely. I do think we need a stronger commercial tax base. We have two ways to increase our tax base, basically. One is to increase the amount of property value that there is, and the other is to raise taxes on the existing base, and at some point that requires an override. So I really think commercial tax base increases is a key strategy to expanding what we can do with our city budget, and particularly at a time when our roads are in really bad shape, when we need more money for our schools to pay our teachers. I think that's a key strategy. And the way to do it, if you ask me, is to make sure that we have the right combination of factors that encourage people to come here. It's having the right kind of access to transportation. It's having the housing that their employees need. That's something we've heard over and over again from our Chamber of Commerce, is that we don't have the right transportation and housing options for us to bring that commercial tax base here. So we need to get that piece right.
Emily?
I do agree, but I want to just caution us that I don't think it is a panacea. First, I'll say that some of our developments, when we cannibalize all commercial, which is what's going to happen where the barn is located, and replace it with a lot of residential, we're going to turn something that was a net positive for the city into a net negative. The tax rate on commercial is almost twice the residential, and it does not bring the cost, particularly education costs. So commercial is very important. But I also, I don't have the quote exactly, but I was reviewing the Citizens Advisory Group reports from 2009, and they actually discounted the value of more commercial as a way to really solve our problems. And I just want to quote one thing, because it's really important for people to understand that we do have a bit of a fiscal crisis in Newton now, and I think a lot of people don't realize it. This was 2009, but it's still accurate. Like many municipalities, the city of Newton is unsustainably living beyond its means. We are simultaneously underfunding some of our needs and aspirations while continuing to make service commitments in both our municipal and school operations beyond our willingness to pay for them. So that was the case 10 years ago, and that is still the case now, as evidenced in particular by our billion-dollar unfunded liability in pensions and retiree health care. So the commercial alone is not going to get us out of this bind, but it is an important piece.
Okay, just a quick comment?
Yeah, there's one quick thing I want to say, which is I agree that that is a concern, but one of the reasons that is happening, particularly when you talk about the barn site, that is a site where the developer has chosen to go through the state's 40B process, which means the city has very little control over what gets built. And I think that's an important point to make, because I want the city to be in the driver's seat, helping to shape the development that happens and make sure that we get the right benefits, that there is the right commercial tax base, that there are improvements to the roads and other improvements that we can get when we negotiate that we lose the opportunity to if we make it too hard and developers choose to go through the 40B process.
If I could just say one thing. Cities, besides Newton, can make things more difficult for 40B developers. Newton has not chosen to go that path. So it is not just the case that we are just victims and there's nothing we can do. Our mayors haven't chosen to do that, but there is more that we could be doing to take more control in this case.
Okay.
Just to be clear, 40B is a state process for communities that don't meet their required affordable housing under the state law, and we don't meet that requirement, which means actually developers do have that option, and they have that opportunity to go to the state agency and to get relief from our zoning. They can ignore our zoning. That is the truth.
All right, so let's move on to the perhaps the old question, but the important one that has to do with funding, and that is Newton has regularly passed Proposition 2.5A overrides to fund schools and other city services. Would you support Proposition 2A override, and if not, what are your ideas for generating revenue to pay for schools, police, firefighters, and other municipal services?
It depends. I have supported overrides in the past, and I have not supported overrides in the past. It really depends on the situation. I take very seriously, maybe especially because I grew up north of the Pike and I'm still there, I am very aware that a lot of people in Newton are not wealthy. And they notice when we raise their taxes, and it can make the difference between people being able to stay or not stay. If you're on a fixed income, you notice a tax increase. So I would be more favorably inclined toward debt exclusion overrides that fund new school buildings or perhaps a new senior center, if and when we come to that. I am much more wary of operating overrides because in the past what that has done has led to the situation that I read about before. If we have a situation where to operate our city, we require 4 to 5% increases in revenue, but we are capped at 2.5% because of Prop 2.5, plus, a 0.5 or a percent for new growth, there's the gap. It grows and grows and grows, and that does not even entail taking care of our billion-dollar unfunded liability.
Okay.
So I would say, I agree that we have a really important responsibility to be stewards of the taxpayers' money. I think overrides should be taken very seriously and should not be done lightly. That being said, I also recognize we do have an unfunded liability. We have all 17 city unions right now operating without a contract in a city where many of our workers can't even afford to live here. We have roads that I think we all agree are far worse than they are in other communities. And we have a lot of people living here who are struggling to stay, and that's the sort of balance that we have to make. I would love to see us look at policies that make it easier for folks to stay in their homes if we do an override. I think there are some things we can do to do that, and I think overrides should be on the table when they're appropriate, but I want to also make sure that we're not hitting the people who can least afford it.
Okay, so we're running out of time for all the other categories, so we're up to the stage in, could you wrap this up promptly? So, talk about pressure. Okay, so you each have an opportunity to ask each other a question. And so, Bryan, let's start with you asking one to Emily.
Sure. At a time when development is on the minds of a lot of people in Ward 2, as you can tell from this debate, you have persistently misrepresented my position by telling voters that I support building 10-story buildings on Washington Street, even though I have made it clear that that is not my position. And the Newton Patch actually put a note in your candidate statement saying that that wasn't an accurate representation of my position. Do you feel that we have a responsibility to the voters to be accurate and to represent each other's positions properly?
So I'll explain what happened, and for folks who don't realize or don't understand the intricacies, which I did not before I was elected, there's things you're allowed to build by right. You don't have to ask the city council for a vote on it. And then, if you want to go above and beyond what you're allowed to do by right, there's additional things you're allowed to do, but you need a special permit. It often requires hiring a lawyer and so forth, but it doesn't mean you can't do it. It doesn't mean you're getting around the rules in some way. This is part of this is part of the law. So when the Washington Street zoning was proposing 10 stories at the Whole Foods site, and my opponent spoke at a hearing saying that he thought there should be a limit to what you could do. I believe you said 6 stories by right. The implication is that you can do more with a special permit. That's all that this was about. This was not a big, complicated thing, and I think a lot of people don't understand that because they didn't understand what special permit versus by right means. That's all that was about. If that is not your position anymore, or if that was not your position and I misunderstood what you said at a hearing, I literally was typing up what you said, that's all it was.
Let's go, rather than have this backwards and forwards, let's go to your final statements where you can use this final statement to clarify.
Emily gets a question too.
Oh, sorry, okay. Emily.
Actually, let's stay on this topic then.
Okay.
I've been very clear that I think we should be limiting development to 3 to 4 stories along Washington Street. In many cases, that would be 3 stories more than what is there now. So that would still allow a lot of development along Washington Street, maybe more than some people would want, but I would support that. What is the tallest that you think we should be allowed to build along Washington Street?
Well, I think the key thing is we're talking about maximum height. I do not think we should have the tallest height for a particularly long building be the height the entire way. And I think that there are trade-offs here. So I would say going from 3 to 5 stories, depending on where it's located, and making sure we're locating buildings that have maximum height in some places, in areas that are further away from residential neighborhoods and actually outside of the core of our village center. And then we can encourage the right kind of development and the things we're looking for, like pocket parks, like open space, if we give a small density bonus, maybe a 1-floor bonus, if they meet certain criteria. So that might mean, maybe they set aside half the property for open space, and that means the maximum height can go to 6 stories in a certain place if it's the right place. And I think the city council is there to make sure we get what is the right place for the right heights right.
Okay.
So 6. I just want to answer, is 6.
I would say 3 to 5
Because
stories.
we do have to pick a number when we vote.
I agree. I would say 3 to 5 stories by right, depending on where you are, and in some cases, a bonus story depending on what benefits we're getting out of it.
Okay.
Okay, let's close it out. Final comments? Emily, would you like to?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Marcus, for moderating, and so much to the Area Council for organizing this. So I think when people are considering who to vote for in this race, with me, it's not a theoretical. You know what you're getting when you vote for me, because I've been doing the job for 6 years. Communication is very important, particularly with the deterioration of the Newton tab over the last few years. The fact that I send out a monthly newsletter, and I was the first counselor to do that, I think people have found that valuable. My office hours, I'm very accessible. My cell phone is on the website. I sometimes go to other websites just to see how other people do things, and you'll see one of those comment boxes. I don't do a comment box. You can reach me anytime. I have a track record of accomplishment, changing the name of the city council because I thought the previous name was sexist. The environmental initiatives, banning plastic bags, protecting open space. I was against carving up parking lot out of Cabot Park for the new Cabot School, and there was some controversy over that, but I'm very, very firm on no net loss of parks. So I've been there to be responsive to folks. I've solved a lot of problems for people, and sometimes that is the most rewarding part of the job. Literally, when I first started, someone reached out because National Grid had left a big metal grate on their berm, and it had been there for 3 years. I got rid of that grate.
Okay.
So helping local government work for people, especially at the state level, the federal government, it's very different. That has been very rewarding, and I would like to be able to continue to serve you and the neighborhood where I grew up and made me who I am for at least another term. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and I ask for your vote on November 5th.
Ryan.
Thank you.
Closing statement?
Okay, and I was told it was supposed to be 30 seconds, so I'm going to try and stick to that. Thank you to the audience for your interest, and to Emily Norton for joining me on stage. I hope you will agree from what you heard today that I am the best person to lead Ward 2 forward as your local ward city councilor. I have the experience to lead on day one and to bring our community together around common goals, to increase affordable housing, to increase access to more transportation options, to respond to the challenges of climate change, and to support our schools and our city's workers. Ward 2 is ready for someone who's a good listener, a hard worker, and a strong leader. I will be there for you when you need me. I ask for your vote on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Emily. And let's thank them for their participation here today.